was so far ahead of the game, and then one day I just woke up behind.
What do you mean?
A few years ago, I heard my roommate talking about me when he thought I wasn't home, and he called me a detective, in quotes. I could hear him doing this with his fingers.
Parth, it's showtime.
Trent, usually I ask you in the past tense, but what are you eating currently?
Yeah, I don't mean to make podcast history, but off mic, I was self-conscious saying I hadn't eaten anything and that you would have to do the majority of the talking. And he said, Trent, get it together. It's past noon. Go eat something. And so maybe having the show is for the best, keeping me on track nutritionally, even though I'll never satisfy the elementary school health class dream of fulfilling the food pyramid every day.
I was just going to ask, you don't fulfill the food pyramid?
Who does that, Has several servings of fruits and vegetables in the same day. Come on.
I know, it's a crazy thought.
What have you been eating?
Thanks for asking, Trent. I had Raisin Bran because I realized we were going to be recording. It was 12:15 and I hadn't eaten anything, and I was like, I'm gonna have a mouthful of Raisin Bran.
Do you like Raisin Bran? I've never had it, but it seems like objectively like the most boring cereal. Is there actually raisins in there?
There's raisins, which I enjoy. It's kind of like less Frosted Flakes, but you know what? I like it. And you know what else I like? I like cutting to the intro, Trent. We have a big interview.
Yes. This is a historic moment.
All right. Cue the intro. Welcome back to Cross Services, where we talk about the movies. Each week we talk about a film and hopefully have a crew member of that film to talk with us about their experience working on the picture. This week we have the writer and director of the film, The Kid Detective, Evan Morgan. Is this true, Trent?
This is all true. We have a podcast. Evan Morgan was the first writer he's the first director we had on the show. We've had a screenwriter before, but didn't it feel so cool?
I felt empowered.
I had so many questions to ask him because, like, every inch of that movie he played a major role in. He also told us about him making his Hitchcock appearance, and that's a really good story later in the interview. Maybe you got to stay tuned the whole time to find out about it. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a bunch of really cool stories, and we're going to just cut straight to it because this is a long interview.
Yeah, strap on your fucking seatbelts, people. It's like an hour, 15 minutes. You don't have to stick around the whole time. But if you want to, that'd be pretty cool. Just
so you guys know, there is a certain part about 20 to 30 minutes in, I think, where the audio quality changes because his mic or his headphones weren't working anymore. So just so you know that, it's not too super drastic. It sounds relatively the same. Anyways, Trent, are you ready to cut to it? You want to be the one that says, let's cut to the interview?
Yeah, let's cut to the Evan. Wait, Parth, was he a nice man? Come on, this is our thing. Was he nice?
Yes, he was very nice.
Yeah, incredibly nice. All right, let's go to the interview with Evan Morgan.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our interview with Evan Morgan. He's worked on several shorts as well as co-writing the feature film The Dirties, and he was also the writer-director for our film today, The Kid Detective. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, it's my pleasure, guys.
You're our first director ever.
Oh, wonderful.
We're very happy to have you.
Yeah, so I watched another interview that you did, and I found out that you went to York University for film, I believe, and we were wondering how that experience went and what important things did you learn from going to an art school?
Well, okay. I mean, there are obviously kind of two schools of thought when it comes to film school and how, important it is for aspiring filmmakers. It technically that discussion and debate kind of revolves around the technical education. And I agree with people like, Tarantino who are saying that you can gain that education via experience. You can figure that part of it out on your own, and just learn by doing. I honestly didn't retain very much of the technical stuff anyway. It was not what I was primarily interested in. And a lot of it, may have stayed in, my noggin for a few years, but by the time it became relevant, when I was, making any of the sort of more significant movies or whatever, the latter shorts, and then Dirties and the Kid Detective, like it most of it was gone. And the one thing that I would say, the reason I would encourage people to really seriously consider going to film school is the community and the relationships that you form with other people who are talented in a different way, whose talents complement whatever yours might be, who are similarly, hungry and may share the same taste. And that was far and away the most valuable part of the experience, was just meeting my future collaborators or people I continue to work with, and remain some of my best friends. And also, I mean, like, the experience of that community is so special too. It's kind of like being at summer camp in a way, because film programs tend to be smaller and they're more intimate. You just really bond with those people in a unique way, much like when you're going to summer camp. For that reason specifically, I just have a great amount of nostalgia for my film school experience, and huge amount of love for the people that I met there, and the ones particularly who I continue to collaborate with. I think, as far as the actual education, it's always going to be related to the professors or the instructors, right? And their personality, whether they see something in you specifically. I think that's important. That was very meaningful, for me, with particular people who I was, for particular teachers from when I was in university. And so some of them, I think really provide a unique education in that respect. But I don't think it's, it's not like whatever the kind of the course outlines are. I don't think I honestly got a lot of that stuff. I don't think I retained a lot of it. Same way that I don't remember anything I learned in high school,
Yeah.
in terms of like math or science, biology, whatever, it's all gone. And I kind of felt like that was the case for a lot of what was actually taught to me. I think maybe what resonated with me more specifically was stuff related to screenwriting, because that was always my first point of engagement. And the films that I admired the most, I think, appreciating them more on the level of the screenplay than, for example, like the cinematography. It's just the part of the process that I've always identified with. And then there were friends of mine who really gravitated towards more technical pursuits. And I'm sure that education for them was much more significant in their development than mine, because it's a much more mechanical process. And as far as writing, I think we only had like 2, maybe 3 like writing courses in all of film school. It felt kind of marginal. And the education that they are able to offer, again, it so much relies on who your professor is, who your instructor is. And if they're teaching you like Robert McKee, that's problematic, I think, because I think it's a dangerous philosophy and dangerous book. And I read that when I was a kid, and it really fucked me up, because he says stuff like, it's going to take you 6 months to a year to write your script, and you have to quit your job, and you have to know all the things that happen in, the character's daily routine, and blah, 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 and shit that you actually don't need to know at all. What I wish we'd had more of in film school was an antidote to that, where people are giving you practical advice in terms of, how do you write a script? Like, do you outline it, or like, is that for everybody, or do you just start, writing? Like, what do other successful screenwriters do? Like things that are not so abstract in terms of theory, but just in terms of like, when this ends and I lose the structure and I lose the deadline, how am I going to continue to do this? Like, what are the things you can tell me that are going to help me structure my own life when this is over?
Right.
And that I thought was really lacking. It's something that, I think they could really benefit from building into, a course outline or whatever. Maybe you guys have had a different experience, but that was how mine felt.
So with all that being said, what was the earliest conception of the Kid Detective? And I guess, how did you first put those thoughts down on paper, speaking about like outlining and early drafts?
Well, okay, so it started as an idea I'd had in film school for a short film, and I never ended up really writing it because it wasn't like a short film idea. I think what I've learned only after now I've stopped making short films, have I learned the difference between short film ideas and feature length ideas. Short film generally is like something happens, like a letter gets sent to the wrong house, just something happens. It can unfold in a relatively short period of time. And a feature idea, I think, is generally, it's like a character, or again, an inciting incident as well. But like a lot of the time, I think it's a character or a world that you want to explore. And this was a character, and it was an idea for a short film about a kid detective who was still a kid but was solving really grisly murders or crime, just really dark crimes, kidnappings, etc. And I wanted it to take place in a kind of heightened universe that was like sort of a twisted, Encyclopedia Brown, suburban paradise gone sour. And that was the first idea. And it wasn't until after I'd met Adam, who I was just a huge fan of his. I thought he was so funny on the OC, and then in things that he'd appeared in subsequently. And I just knew before we even met that like he was somebody that I wanted to work with. And I had I ran into him originally at a short film festival about 10 years ago, and traded emails with him, and then ran into him again 2 years ago at another film festival. And that is when I first mentioned this idea to him, where I kind of looked through my notes and my old stuff that never got done to see if there was anything that I could update for him. And at that point, this premise felt much more viable and exciting than when it was actually just going to be a kid. Like the central irony was really exciting for me, and the comic potential of imagining an adult version of Encyclopedia Brown, and nobody thinks he's special anymore. Nobody's impressed when he solves the small cases. I just thought that was great, and so suggestive of not only a character and that character's kind of style and temperament, but also the world that he is relying upon for so much of his identity. And by the world I mean community. And so the first part of that script appeared really quickly. The first act I wrote really quickly, and by the time I had to figure out, okay, well, what's the mystery, then it started to take much, much longer, and I got stuck for a long time. But that was the origin of the idea.
Yeah, I heard that you spent 8 years between, I think, the genesis or the first draft or first act being written to it actually getting made. I was wondering, like, was that 8 years spent, like, I think you said that the problem with the mystery is that you have to sort of reverse engineer it, and that takes longer. And I was wondering, were those 8 years spent developing the script, or was the script sort of written and like minorly changed, and it was really trying to get financiers for the movie?
Well, it was 8 years, total, like from the moment I had the idea to do it with Adam until it was on, all those screens during the plague. Like it was 8 years total, maybe a bit shy of 8, actually. Yes. Yeah, it was about 7.5 years, probably, all said and done. So breaking that down, every part of it took a long time. The script took, I think, me a year and a half just to finish the first draft. And that is not good. Like that's slow. And that's how Robert McKee wants you to write it. Not to be too, not to harp on that for too long. But like I said, like the premise was very suggestive to me of a character world, and also tone, because it had the potential to be funny, but also very lonely and dramatic and sad. And so that stuff, kind of unfolded very quickly. And then when it got to the mystery, I was like, well, shoot, he could really be solving anything. Like, maybe it's a murder, maybe it's a kidnapping, maybe it's who knows what. Like, I was sort of overwhelmed with the possibilities. And my first instinct was, well, why don't we try and take this character to Los Angeles, and then it'll be a fish out of water story, and he can be looking for a missing or, a movie star or someone who was found dead. And it'll just literally be like a Raymond Chandler, but with an Encyclopedia Brown protagonist. That was my first instinct. And I spent probably like 5 months thinking of that type of scenario and exploring it, and not really feeling like I was excited about what I was finding. And it wasn't until I went back to Brody and was like sharing some ideas with him, and he's like, no, you got to keep it in the town. And that's when it all clicked into place for me. And I was like, oh, okay, well then if it stays in the town, I think that was maybe even the point that I determined he should have had a case that in his past that he couldn't solve. Because prior to that, I think I was just relying on the fact that, oh, what is impressive when you're 12 is not impressive when you're 32. And so that was a huge, shifting of gears. And I explored that, and it started revealing itself again at a, much greater pace. And then I got stuck again. And one of the things I learned in the process of writing this was like, what makes something take a long time, it's not this slow crawl, this sort of like trudge through every day, only coming up with one or two ideas each day. What I noticed is the ideas, they flow pretty fast. And then you spend 6 months not having any. Like you just spend a lot of time, not necessarily not having any, but having the wrong ones. You're stuck and you're working in the wrong direction. And then that happened to me again, where I was going to have the culprit be a different character. And I was coming up with ideas for that storyline. And I wasn't really getting anywhere. And I'm sharing with a lot of it, the process stuff with you guys because you're film students. Hopefully it's what you want to hear. But
this podcast is pretty much solely at this point where it's just for the people that want to know technical stuff.
Right.
So.
Okay, good. Well, that's great because I really wish that that I'd heard more like stuff like this when I was in your situation, because I think it would have saved me a lot of time. But as I was saying, I was stuck at a certain point in the script. I wasn't sure where it was going to go, how I was going to push it forward. And I kept having ideas, but they weren't revealing the next scene or the next sequence. They weren't telling me how I could get to the end of the second act or beyond. And what I realized is, if you're stuck like that, you've just got to change something that you don't even think needs changing has to be changed in order to unlock the flow again. And that's what I did. And then again, it flowed. And so when I say a year and a half, it wasn't a year and a half of like really, like slowly cataloging, ideas and writing scenes and dialogue and revising and revising and revising. It really was having a burst of ideas, then being stuck for a long time, then changing something, having a burst of ideas, then being stuck for a longer time probably, and then realizing, oh shit, I got to change something again. And then that maybe happened 2 other times, and then the script was ready, and I went back to Adam, and because I had a celebrity, like a star and an actor that people liked, attached to my movie, I naively expected that the process of financing it would be fairly simple because I was so confident about the script, and I'd spent so much time in that world with that character, and I knew that it was a really dense script, and that again, I just thought like, oh, that has to be a commodity. That has to be something that people will take seriously. And I was dismayed to discover that it really isn't, and that it doesn't matter how people respond to it creatively. They'll get excited. They'll tell you, and genuinely, they'll tell you how much they love something and point to different things that particularly resonated. What it really came down to was viability of the cast. And because this is such a film led by Adam alone, it's not the type of movie where he can, talk to his friends and suddenly you have like 4 actors leading your film who are all names. This was one really big role, another fairly big role for a younger actor, and then a whole bunch of supporting roles, a lot of them for children, or at least younger performers. And that was a real challenge. And the movie that I wrote was larger than what we could have financed with just Adam alone. That's why it took so long. And it just required a lot of elements coming together in order to make it possible. And it seemed that it was going to happen every summer, I think for 4 summers, and something would fall away. And, in the end, we got a verbal commitment from Telefilm, and it was really just like we switched production companies, pursued a different strategy, actually pursued a higher budget than what we were contemplating previously. And timing became a major part of it, where we had producers who had relationships for a certain part of the financing that we could leverage, which made Telefilm, which is the Canadian financing body, that's the government that funds up to a third of budgets for independent filmmaking in Canada. That became viable. And finally, we, pushed it across the threshold. And for so long, I was feeling like, oh man, I feeling like the movie was cursed because it kept seeming like it could happen. All we needed was one element. All we needed was one actor, this actress we were looking at prior to Sophie and Elise. All we needed was for her to say yes, and she was enough of a name that it would go. And things like that every year. And it just, it always seemed like it was going to happen. It seemed like, oh, this studio wants to, or this production company wants to do it. They want to put in this amount of money. Or these people want to come on executive producers. This famous like director wants to come on as an executive. It's like so many times I celebrated getting, the what we thought were the key moments in getting this financed,
Right.
and then it just didn't happen.
You're Sisyphus putting that rock up.
Totally. And then at a certain point, like each time it would hit me more and more because I was, losing a lot of time, and this project was relying on me specifically for so much. And it wasn't like, oh, okay, wrote the script, I'm going to direct it, hand it off to the producers, let them do what they do. Like no one was as invested as me, and that investment kept getting more and more and more scary and significant. The sunken costs were mounting, and I just realized that, holy shit, before I knew it, like I've spent all of my 30s so far trying to get a film finance that I wrote when I was in my late 20s, and that it becomes a scary thing psychologically, particularly if you're a writer, a director, because then you're like, oh shit, I don't want to fall too far behind myself. And I got really down about it, but couldn't stop trying to do it, even though Adam, I think, checked out maybe a year prior to getting it done because he just didn't think it was going to happen and was suggesting that we make it as a series. He didn't check out. He just was not optimistic. He kind of lost a lot of his hope for it. And also he knew that he was getting older, and he was like, I don't want to play this character when I'm 40. Like he just told me flat out, like, I just don't want to do it. Like it's because I guess the character was, still kind of like, he's not really a man child, but he's obviously, he's it's a case of arrested development in many ways. If I'd had another project that was close to ready, it's possible I would have shifted gears, but The Kid Detective was the center of my universe creatively for so long that I just couldn't give up on it. And we thought we were looking good to shoot it that summer. Adam wasn't convinced, but like enough things were happening that I was very optimistic about it. And then early on, one of those things sort of fell through, and I just got super spooked, and we changed the whole strategy, went with a different production company, and had a verbal commitment from Telefilm, thus greenlighting the film within, I think, like 2 months. They made us wait. That's incredible. They made us wait a year, I think, in order before we actually got the money. But we got it. It was the first time for them that they financed like a first feature at this level, and it just felt like, wow, like we were relating to the right people at the right time, and then ultimately the crew and cast who came together to do it were perfect. Like I was just so lucky to be surrounded with the particular people who were pulled into the orbit of this project. And all those years of feeling like, oh, this project's cursed, suddenly I realized, oh no, wait a second, this is actually as good as it could possibly be.
It's actually happening.
It's happening, and it's happening the right way, at the right budget level. Still very challenging budget level versus the script, but the right level, much healthier than what we were pursuing in previous iterations, and with truly the right team of people, and the people who were like soulfully committed to the film and really demonstrating what they could bring to it. So it really worked out as well as it possibly could have for me in the long run to that point. Then, the actual release in the midst of COVID was much more challenging. I wasn't really walking on clouds at that point. But I couldn't feel better really about like how the journey of getting it made happened, as long as arduous as it was. I wouldn't trade it. I mean, I would trade it for the education, but I wouldn't trade it for how it ultimately came together and the people that were a part of it.
So you were talking about how you had to sort of manage the budget around how fantastical a world you were trying to build, and I really like the sort of like pivoted Earth, sort of Twin Peaks-esque that you've created. And where did you sort of like decide to like draw the line on how fictional you could get and still like have like a good foundation?
Yeah, well, as far as like the idiosyncrasy of the world, I don't know if there even was specifically a line. I think the concept for it was, imagine the world of Encyclopedia Brown or the world of Nancy Drew and that kind of perfect, suburban setting where like everybody knows the mailman and blah blah
Mm.
blah, and it already has a kind of strangeness to it because of just how interconnected everyone's lives are and how perfect kind of the veneer of that sort of community is. And then imagine something terrible happens. What does the darker version of that world look like? It's darker, but it's still the same kind of fanciful place. It's not, it was never realistic, in Encyclopedia Brown, and it's still not realistic. The darker version, it's just a darker version. and so the things that could feel equally viable in, the world of Encyclopedia Brown, Nancy Drew, blah, blah. Like I think the Hardy Boys, maybe Nancy Drew as well. Like maybe they saw more serious stuff sometimes, but for sure with Encyclopedia Brown, shoot, I forgot. I lost the train of thought for a moment. In terms of where the line is for that
Yeah,
stuff.
about like how the budget and or at least how
Oh, sure.
you're grateful that you had sort of like chopped down your ideas because it kept you on a more manageable budget. Like you had a number and you had to like stick to it, I guess.
Yeah, well, I did not write with budget in mind, and again relates to naivete and thinking that we got Adam Brody, like it's and feeling confident about the script. I think we should maybe be able to do it for like $5 million. A lot of things seem to come together in terms of just like people really wanting, in my mind, like wanting to see Adam in a role like this, and things that I thought would make the financing easier that ultimately didn't. As far as like how far to take and twist the world, like in the overnighters, for example, could exist, in the world of Encyclopedia
Right, sure.
Brown.
Definitely.
Like the things, the kids on the stoop could exist in the world of Encyclopedia Brown. They just probably won't be drug users, and so all we're really doing is imagining the darker version of that really familiar setting that people have encountered in all sorts of children's literature and films, whether it's Encyclopedia Brown, etc., or like Little Rascals, Dennis the Menace, that stuff. As far as the budget, I was not writing for it, and we actually did have to cut by far the most elaborate sequence of the movie, like maybe 2 weeks before we started shooting, because I realized that I was not going to get the time I needed, the number of days I needed on set to be able to get the performance that I was searching for. And when you're doing a film that is tonally specific, that is, the thing that I felt was most necessary to prioritize, because it's not like when you're doing a realistic film or a naturalistic film, or even like a broad comedy, the tone was so specific that I knew it was going to be a process of honing in on set, and just wanted to make sure I had time to do it. And so I just decided that I was going to cut this sequence, which was actually about the overnighters in the high school. And the original version of that was just much, much more elaborate. It involved hundreds of overnighters in the school having like a rave and all sorts of like wildness. And it was like the big set piece of the movie. I cut it and had to rewrite that sequence, I think 2 weeks prior to the start date. It was incredibly frightening, and I think I was really sick to my stomach, not even losing the sequence, but having to supplement it with so little time. In an odd way, I feel like it was for the best. I think that if we had tried to stage that very elaborate version of the sequence, the chances of it looking bad, the chances of it not playing on screen the way I imagined it in my mind, and the chances of it feeling like an overlong tangent, in a movie that already relies on a certain amount of indulgence from the audience, I think it could have been a disaster if we'd shot it as I wrote it. And the way that it ultimately worked out, I prefer atmospherically, I think. And, I was able to add a couple of jokes to it, which I still enjoy. And it became a more functional sequence in terms of taking us to the next clue, to the next scene.
So what scene did you rewrite it as?
Well, so instead of him, arriving in the midst of a rave, which was the original version of the script where there are kids all over the place, now the overnighters are a much, it's like a much smaller kind of subculture. right? Where it's just like there's only like 12 kids in the school. Maybe there's, I don't know, maybe there's like 12 to 20 or something, scattered throughout the school, but it's empty. It's still a quiet, dark school. There are just kids kind of running around in the dark, skittering around, instead of a full scale party, which was going to be a much more surreal experience. Obviously, what we have instead is more functional. They arrive at the first locker and then the second, and then they find that they use tissues, and Adam's character is disgusted by it, and we just find the bottle of drugs in the jacket. Like it's more functional, but it still gives you what I think you want from this type of film, which is like the kind of Nancy Drew walking around in the dark with a flashlight. It's that moment in this particular movie. We don't do it elsewhere. And it would have instead have been like a really big musical sort of like set piece that would not have been quite as tight or functional, may have offered a boost in terms of just like the world, the grandeur of the story.
No, I think you're right. I think this works way better.
I think so too. Yeah.
I was going to say that the movie really straddles this line of reality, and I think it doesn't ever become too wacky or insane. And not to say that it would have been that, but I think the way you have it here really keeps it within those boundaries. And that kind of helps pivot into another question I had, which is, because of how difficult that tone is to balance, in terms of your process, were you shooting different takes or like writing different versions of scenes slightly in dialogue? So like a more comedic versus a more serious, or different approaches, and then figuring it out in the editing room? Or were you working really hard writing it and then just shooting specifically what was on the page?
No, the script was the script. I mean, I'd spent so much time with it, and then it had 4 years after I finished, writing it, to, revise it and reread it and really scrutinize it. And so, I walked onto the set feeling, nerves, about a whole number of things. But what I was really relying on was the work that I'd already done. And I was like, I know what I'm searching for, and that is going to assist me when it comes to everything else. And so there weren't alt versions of scenes. There were occasionally alt versions of lines if we felt like a joke was maybe potentially too provocative, or if it wasn't going to land, like there were maybe a couple safeties, not a lot. There was a different version originally of how her parents died. That was the only stuff that I think I kind of had two rival scenes for, and then I just chose one and shot it. And then, I quite ironically decided it was the wrong choice, and found a way through sheer force of will and going through all of the rushes to try and find moments where I could maybe make it work to do the whole 3 lines of it in ADR, which is the biggest cheat of the whole movie probably, to do it the other version, the version that I decided not to shoot. But otherwise it was really just like, I trusted the tonal balance of the script. The strategy from the beginning was like, this is an elevated place, but we're grounding it with performance, and it's joke. It's driven by humor and irony a lot of the time, but we're going to play it real because where we're headed is extremely real, and it will feel like the film is at odds with itself if we don't treat this character as a real person, and the strategy with respect to the script, we've done the same thing with The Dirties, where it was a movie that is predominantly comic, driven a lot of the time by comedy, and ends with incredible, a horrifying incident, a horrifyingly tragic, disturbing incident. And the way you do it is you just remind people what the stakes are. You just remind people on page 10, oh, real shit can happen here. This girl just got kidnapped, and then you remind people 10 pages later about the girl that got kidnapped, or then there's another boy who's been murdered, and a few pages after that, you're meeting that kid's family, his parents, and that's not funny at a certain point, and you just want to remind people that even though this is, a heightened reality, real things are still possible. Like there's still a sense of consequence. The stakes are still real. And so that was what I relied on, going into it, rather than trying to hedge my bets with respect to any of the dialogue that was scripted. And as far as performance in the edit, it really just was finding that place where it is not so over the top that you're sacrificing the authenticity of the character or the environment, but it's not also so quiet and like so subdued that the film loses all of its energy. And that was a really difficult balance. Finding that line in the edit was one of the bigger challenges, where it's like, oh, okay, where, how far can we push it in one direction, that favoring energy, without sacrificing the authenticity? And look, it is like, when you compare it with much more sort of like broad styled comedy, it's not a super high energy movie, but you're also dealing with a super low energy character. He's got no reason to be, like
move around fast.
Yeah, exactly. And Adam at a certain point was worried about it because he's so used to the opposite. He's so used to being brought onto a film where his particular function is to really,
inject energy,
inject it totally. With respect to, Adam and his reservations, it's like he was worried that, that he was being toned down too much and that it was going to lose its dynamism and that he wasn't able to like paint with all the colors the way that he typically would. And thank God that he'd said something, because this was maybe after the first week of shooting, he mentioned something, and we came up with this system where I would always give him like the first takes on each lens, just give him the first one or two takes on each lens. And it ended up being such a saving grace, because when I stitched together the film my way, with the takes that I had circled, it was there just wasn't enough dynamism. There just wasn't enough of that energy. And sometimes it's as simple as in the diner, he says a line and he has a piece of lettuce in his mouth and he slurps it up at the end of his line. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's as simple as that, that gives you just what you need, in terms of a slightly heightened energy, something slightly more than what's realistic and what's entirely true or honest. You know what I mean? To the actual character and to the actual moment, to get you through it. And again, it was like with the writing, it was not such a challenge because I'd known how it worked with the Dirties, and so I felt like I could pull it off again with this particular story. And it really wasn't until the editing that I was looking through takes I'd already seen and really trying to find anything that was different, anything that would just give it a little bit of a boost in an odd way. And then a lot of those got stitched into the film, and by virtue of doing that, it raised the energy level. And some people will still watch this movie and be like, oh, it was, there was just no energy. It was too low energy. But, I think like for me, I really love straight face comedy. I love when something is funny without having to wink at the audience, and when actors are funny without sacrificing the authenticity or the truth of the character. And I just find it more satisfying. And the filmmakers who I love the most are people who, have practiced that their whole careers. And it was just an interesting to kind of be in this situation where it really relied ultimately on a kind of fortuitous, I won't say conflict, but like disagreement, between me and my lead actor, in order to have our cake and eat it too, in order to kind of get the best of both. And again, now it'll inform how I approach the next one. And I probably will do the same thing, where it's like, either start more grounded and work your way up, or, start high and, then
whittle
start
your way
to
down.
Exactly. Yeah. And have that variety, because it is so important to have options with respect to the edit. We wrote a really literal movie and people warned me that, oh, it's going to change so much when you get into the edit. And I was like, no. I mean, like, I've been staring at this thing for years. Like, I know what I know what I want. And like, I was blown away by what we ultimately had to change and push and reconsider and rewrite, in the midst of the edit, and how many cheats exist. Not just what I was saying before about like looping in audio that was never even coming out of the characters' mouths. And we did do that a few times, but also like there are like fucking like split screens all over my movie with like respect to two shots where I liked one actor's delivery in one
review.
Take. Oh, does he do that?
Oh yes.
Yeah, very much so.
I didn't even know.
He'll stitch like 4 or 5 different takes together.
Oh, that's funny. I wasn't even aware. We just did it out of really truly like, wanting the best of two different
out
takes.
of desperation.
Yeah, and it's everywhere. And like when we revealed the number of VFX in this movie to the people that were doing our VFX, they were blown away because they thought they were going to be like 10, like 10 digital effects. The treehouse, for example, is a digital effect. We didn't build it. But then there was just so many that no one will ever watch the movie and know. And that was really, really interesting.
So I'm sure a unique challenge to writing and directing a comedy is to try to compare like what you predict like the average moviegoer will think is funny like versus what you think is funny, and then like I would imagine it's kind of hard to see if that's coming across on the set because you wrote it, and so you're just looking at everyone being like, I don't want to laugh at my own jokes, but is this funny, guys? Haha,
Yeah, well, I was definitely not going to laugh at those jokes no matter what because I was so used to them. But
yeah, you looked at them for 8 years.
yeah. But I have, when I'm writing, I always share with my partner, who is like the unsung hero of this movie, who every time I'm writing a new scene, I'll read it to her, and she was the first person I shared the script with. And if she tells me something is, bad or doesn't work, I'll get angry and I'll defend it, and maybe we'll have a fight. But deep down, I know it's bad. I know it doesn't work, and I remove it. Conversely, if she tells me that it's great or that it's good or that it's funny, then I don't think twice about it. And the reason I can trust it is because I know that we have the same taste. I know that we have the same sense of humor. And, for me, I don't really like comedies that appeal to everybody uniformly. I like things that don't.
A little bit more niche.
Yeah, exactly. And even something that's super broad like Dumb and Dumber, which is like extremely broad comedy and really obviously a huge hit, it still takes so many risks, and it pushes it so far that, of course, there were people who watched that movie and didn't get it and hated it. And in fact, I think the critics didn't get it and hated it. And it probably still has a rotten score, and yet it's probably one of the most brilliant screenplays of like the 90s.
I think Roger Ebert like retracted a review he gave of it and said he was wrong. And Jim Carrey said that was one of his favorite moments of his career.
That's awesome.
Continue, sir.
Yeah, that's good for him. I mean, that's great. I think more should follow suit. Like, it's incredible to me that you could watch that movie and not be in awe of the creativity and the cleverness of that dialogue and the audacity of that premise. And so I guess but returning to the question, like, I'm not really worried about trying to make everybody laugh. I only want to make myself laugh and the people who have my particular sense of humor, which I know is not super small, all my friends have the same humor, and and we love the movies we all love the same comedies for the same reason. And
right.
And I think that has to be the way forward, because it's kind of fruitless. It's A, impossible to appeal to everybody. And then B, like, why would you want to? Like, why would you want why would you want something that sits in the middle? As far as the, testing the humor, again, once I have those conversations with my partner, I share it with my friends who I really trust. And then, that's where I gain my confidence with respect to the document, is just sharing it with people whose opinion I really trust. And, Adam was one of those people. And I have a few other really, dear friends, most of whom were from film school that I'll send it to, whose opinions I trust. And then as far as on set, it relates to my personal taste, but I just don't love when, you see the actor winking on the camera. I think that it can be beautiful. And Adam did a lot of it in like the OC, you know what I mean? Where where he's really breaking out of the formula of the show in a way that does, it heightens the world of the show, like when Adam is really doing his thing in some of the best moments of that series. And I love it. And I love it. And, but with respect to this particular tone, where we have concerns about where we're headed in terms of the overall story, I want to believe that, like, if the line is told, in a way that's true to the character, where it's not being injected with like more than it needs, or it's not like feeling hammy or like a Saturday Night Live sketch, Saturday Night Live sketch. I feel like that's going to be funnier. And so when I'm on the monitor, all I'm really looking for is the authentic delivery, the one where I hear it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's that's Abe. I know it, and that's when I know we can move on, or put on the next lens and do it again. With respect to the edit, that's where it becomes a whole different thing, because what works on the page doesn't always work once you're cutting it together. So much relies on things that you can't control on the day and that you wouldn't be able to evaluate, and so much is related to rhythm. And what was really tough about doing this film and finishing this movie in the pandemic was we never watched it with an audience. Still have never seen it with an audience. And
so you've never heard like where the laughs, the group laughs are supposed to be, I guess.
Never heard it. No, I can't wait till we finally have an occasion to do that.
So you never had like a test screening or anything?
We did with rough versions.
Okay.
And with smaller groups. So we had, let's say, 5 people, I think was the largest number that we had.
That's not a group laughter.
No. But it tells you some of what you need. You know what I mean? And even honestly, 2 people, you can watch it with 1 person and know whether jokes are landing or not. And a lot of the time in the earlier cuts of the film, they weren't. Like, there's something that wasn't quite working. And it related to just the pacing overall of the film, scenes that were there that we ultimately had to extract in order to provide, I guess, a greater sense of purpose. Like, just like there were scenes that existed that did not advance the story, that were there for the sake of character and allowing the audience to identify with Adam's character, I thought, on a deeper level, or in a way where they would recognize themselves in him. Turned out I didn't need them because of his performance, because of what he brings to the role. People already kind of like him, even if he's acting in ways that are selfish. People are recognizing themselves in him because of what he brought to it. And I think that is a real testament to his talent and his particular, just charisma, to his manner. I don't think there are a lot of actors who could have done it. And so we didn't need those scenes, but it took me as the writer director a while to see that. And I'll give credit to, my producer, Will, on this project, who saw stuff even at the script level, and he was like, "You're going to cut that." And I was like, "No, I won't. Like, it's people love that scene. I'm not going to cut it." And I cut it. And in the script, it really worked, because there's the relationship that you have when you read a script is very similar to reading a book, where the character really is your avatar, and you really are experiencing the world through that character in a very direct way. And I had a scene where Adam's character writes an email and then rewrites it and then rewrites it. It was fucking 2.5 pages, and people really loved it in the script. And it was a point of endearment for the character. But on camera, it wasn't just an issue of it not being cinematic to see a character write and rewrite. It was just, people were starting to wonder, where is this movie going? And then that puts twice as much pressure on the next scene. And so those jokes don't have the punch that they would otherwise have.
Compounding effect.
It's true. And when you lose people early,
they're gone.
I realized
they're not coming back.
Exactly. They're not coming back. And even in the first 5 minutes, we had scenes that we added to his first encounter with the parents, which is the first dialogue-driven scene of the film. Literally the first dialogue of the film. And I didn't write it with jokes out of the gate. I wrote it as a more kind of realistic version of kind of what I'd experienced with my own parents in my 20s, when they were bringing me groceries and worrying about me. And I thought that would be enough, that other people would sort of recognize the dynamic, and that would be a point of engagement. And it wasn't. And instead I had to change again in the edit the first lines of that scene, rewrite them and disguise them with the editing to build jokes into it that weren't there, in order to clarify the tone of the movie for people immediately, so that they weren't waiting 5 minutes to determine whether or not this was a comedy. They weren't waiting to get into the flashback sequence to determine whether or not it's going to be funny, And it's true that if you're losing people early, it is so tough to get them back. Versus if they laugh at the first joke, the chances of them laughing at the second are so much higher. Yeah. And then again, it builds on that. And it was unbelievable to me, truly, as confident as I felt about the script, it was unbelievable to see the difference between the way people engage with a piece of writing and the way that they engage with it as an audience, watching something play out in front of them. On a lower budget film, where you don't have the opportunity to really get a lot of footage. Like you can't make a really super atmospheric film on a lower budget unless that is specifically the intent. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and in a world that is elevated where everything has to be controlled and you're relying on extras for everything basically that you want to cut to, you can't over rely on atmosphere. You just don't have it in your footage. Like, we went back out a year after we shot the movie, or almost a year after we shot the movie, to get extra B-roll, because I realized, like, we really do need it. We need more of a sense of the world than what we have. And I knew at the level of the script that that's what I wanted, but I was just, told early I had to make tough choices, and that was going to be impossible to build into our schedule. And so what this film really relied on was jokes landing in order to win people over early and then keep them for the duration.
Right. So, sort of speaking about translating the text into visuals, I wanted to ask what kind of conversations you had with your DP. Is it Michael McLaughlin?
Yeah, McLaughlin.
Okay. Regarding the look, because it's not overstated, but it's got a very particular visual style, and I was wondering how you guys landed on that.
Okay, so this is really interesting. I'll start by saying that with respect to the way it was lit and like the color palette of the film, I didn't want it to look like the Maltese Falcon. I didn't want it to look like a super high contrast noir. This film certainly sits between, the realm of the hard-boiled detective story, Raymond Shanley, Dashiell Hammett, and that of Encyclopedia Brown, and Nancy Drew. It exists in the space in between, but I felt like it had to be a kid detective movie with a really dark destination. I didn't need to see another high contrast noir. I wanted to see a different version of it. I wanted to see, Abe Applebaum's version of the noir, Encyclopedia Brown's version of it. I wanted to keep the color, certainly, with respect to the flashback sequence. I mean, that's like a no-brainer. That had to be, as kind of bright and saturated as
optimistic. Yeah,
exactly.
It's through the rose-colored glasses that he's looking at his past. Like, it even sounds like a creative choice. Well, I guess it is a creative choice.
Oh yeah, it is, and again, it's like it was obvious, like the way that it's written. You already know what it's going to look like. With respect to the rest, there is more ambiguity, and we didn't. It was really, for me, it's like I wanted a certain degree of contrast. I was worried that if we did try and do it like a full-on noir, and there was shadow over half the frame or half someone's face, I thought that it would interfere with the comedy. And I was looking for examples of comedies that were similarly, that were comparable to this tonally, that did that, and I couldn't find any. I think like A Serious Man is an example of a movie that we looked at because, again, it's an elevated world, but it's not The Big Lebowski. I was looking at those kinds of things, and I was just like, okay, I don't want shadow over half the faces. I don't want to do it because I fear that tonally it's going to make things challenging for me, particularly if I'm going with grounded performances. I worry that we will lose the humor,
right.
and so for that reason, I wanted something that was a bit brighter, that was not as bright as the flashback sequence. We had to recognize a difference between the cleanliness, the color of that sequence versus what the world of the story looks like today. I thought it was it was on a gradient, and I was just like, we can achieve a lot of that stuff by making the world just look dingier. The storefronts are empty. We have graffiti on a window, and it just feels like it's a little bit grayer. It's a little cloudier. It's not quite the same. Like we still wanted some contrast. We wanted the frames to feel dynamic, and again, it was very much like with the tone in terms of performance. It was really just finding the right line for it. Like shot listing and stuff like that. This is a challenging movie because it's so stationary. Really, when you're looking at the script from the eye of the DP, I hadn't realized this until he was, flagging it in our earlier conversations. Like, it's characters sitting, having conversations across the table. Like, that's most of the Kid Detective, We
were going to ask you about whether you had a storyboarding process or a shot listing process. Yeah.
We didn't storyboard, but we shot listed, and we had a lot of time to talk about it. And I discovered that a lot of stuff was, it was really just my DP pulling it out of me because I obviously had been living in this world for such a long period of time. And he just wanted to see what I saw, when I was reading the script, just pulling it out of me and finding the language for it and turning it to something functional and practical. And the first thing that he flagged that became a real, it was something that we were wary of. It was just, yes, this is a very stationary film. Like most of it is, Adam's character talking across the tabletop. The first scene with his parents, living room, talking across a coffee table. Then we have the flashback stuff where he's in his treehouse, he's in his office. At least that moves more quickly. And then we're on the other side of that, and it's him sitting across the desk talking to people in his office. Then he's talking to Sophie and Elise's character in his office, and then they're going around town and interviewing people, talking across coffee tables, and interrogation tables. And then the whole climax of the movie is a conversation happening across a table, right? And so, at that point, like, oh, this isn't going to be like Boogie Nights where like the camera is like flying around the room. It wouldn't make any sense. It wouldn't make any sense at all. And the only option is either you try and rewrite some of these scenes or reblock it in a way that will, allow for more variety, which is what we explored. And, we had blocked scenes in the office where he wasn't sitting, right? And where he's moving around a bit more, just to try and create something that just felt different from the previous version of that scene. And it was fucking with the comedy. It was completely killing the comedy. And so my DP was like, look, you've been working on this for 6 years. Let's not take any chances. Let's concentrate on the on the rhythm of the dialogue, and let's make sure that you're getting that, and just see what happens. And I think like he really did a beautiful job. I love the film, the way the world looks. It was something I couldn't describe. I kept trying to find a movie that I could point to and be like, that's what I want it to look like. That's what I want it to look like. And I couldn't find it. I just couldn't. In terms of like where we were sitting on that line between how flat it is versus how flat versus how contrast, or and then with respect to the color and brightness of it, that it is what we did, and so it might not. Again, it's something that some people might be like, oh, why didn't they light it like a noir? You know what I mean? And it's like this was what we wanted. This is what I always wanted to do. The next movie I make, probably there'll be less sitting. And I'm just really pleased that the work that was done in terms of the dialogue and the story and all that stuff, like, I don't think a lot of people get to the end of it and realize that that's what they've watched, as a movie with people talking across tables. It doesn't feel like My Dinner with Andre, or like something like that, or 12 Angry Men. And I'm really relieved because it was a risk. With shooting it the way
until you mentioned it, I genuinely, like, now that you're saying it, I'm realizing it, but I really didn't even think of it in those terms, like as that kind of a movie, until you mentioned it.
I think because whether it's a red herring or a dead end or or the detective story, like, you're always on the edge of your seat, like a pivotal piece of information or a clue could come out. So I feel like that kept the momentum going so much that I didn't even think that people were sitting next to each other, whether in a car or at tables, the whole time, essentially.
Well, it's a great relief to me. I wasn't thinking about it when I was writing it, because I was thinking about it in exactly that way, which was just like, continuing to allow humor to drive a lot of these scenes while doling out enough information to make it seem like the film is headed somewhere. Of course, that's me, as someone who really does relate to movies that I watch as a writer. Like I said at the beginning, the movies that I, love the most are the ones that I just like, oh man, like I love the ingenuity on the level of the script, and then, of course, when I pass it over to my DP, who's approaching it from a very different perspective, it's the first thing he notices. It's like, fuck, like, how are we going to keep this interesting? And it was a risk for sure that we made on the day a lot of the time, in terms of like, trying to block it a different way and then realizing, no, it's not going to work. Let's do it the way that it was originally scripted. We're starting again, like, move the camera, relight it. Like we did that a couple times. It just, again, it proves that like story really is like the guiding light, and if you can reward people's engagement, with the information that they're craving or the sense of progress that they're craving, or keeping them amused, or keeping them laughing or whatever, or surprised in terms of like the way a scene might turn and become suddenly more serious, like then that is ultimately what matters. And so at the end of the day, you might not have made Goodfellas, right? But like you've told this story as well as it could have been told with the the time and the instruments that you had available to do so. And so I feel really reassured by that. But it will 100% factor into my writing process from now on, and that's great.
So, with this being your first feature film, we were wondering which aspect of the job, like, you were surprised by, and also how long the shooting schedule was, and also if you made a cameo in the film.
Okay, well, we had 26 days, which is pretty good for like an indie film. Very challenging with a script that was the length of this script, which the shooting script, I believe, was 128 pages with a lot of different locations and a lot of different actors. So it was really, really tough. And each day ultimately became kind of like an absolute mad dash. So whatever the last scene was on the call sheet, I started to learn was going to be a crazy, crazy, crazy scene. And it was. And like, I mean, crazy in the sense of like, our DP had like buckets of sweat dripping off of him, and he's having to go and run and reframe this and relight that, and like I gave 3 takes to get an entire actor's performance. Like the scene towards the end of the film, at the very end of the climax, after the mystery has been resolved and it's Adam's character in a field, right, on a phone. I had 2 takes to get that entire scene of dialogue.
Jesus.
And that happened every single day but one of this shoot, and so that was really crazy. So it was really tight. What was the other questions? I know there's the cameo. Was another one in between?
As a first-time director, was there any like responsibility or aspect that like good or bad surprised you, or that you weren't expecting?
I would probably need a little more time to think of like what the right answer is to that question.
No, it's all right. To tell us if you made a cameo.
Oh yeah, cameo. Well, firstly, I'll just say that I was losing my mind in prep. I was just really worried about a lot of things that I was concerned were not going to come together in time. We didn't have our cast, with like days to spare before shooting. Like there were still roles that I hadn't cast even when we started shooting. And a lot of things like that I was just really concerned about. And of course, I've been working on this movie for so long. Everything is happening now. Everybody's here. And it's kind of mine to mess up in a way, Yeah. And so I was really anxious about that. I guess what I was surprised by in a really positive way was how that dissipated instantly. Walking onto the set the first day, sure, I was sick to my stomach when I woke up, but, ran to the bathroom like the moment my eyes opened. But like I walked onto the set and it was exactly like, making a student film or a short film. It shrinks down to the size of your monitor and you're just engaging with what's in that frame. And you just know when you have what you need. And that was a really, really positive surprise. And I think that the actual production, the actual shoot, was probably the most fun part of the entire process, even though it was crazy and every day ended, in a mad dash. And I was, living day to day. The collaboration was so exhilarating. The process of making it and knowing that we were getting it was really exciting and exhilarating. And it was a positive experience, whereas prep for me was not so positive. And there were lots of weeks and even months in the edit that were not so positive. And obviously the process to get it financed was not so positive, until it was. But so that's what I would say the biggest surprise for me was. And then, yeah, I did make a cameo, but it's very short. So the old movie that he's watching as an adult, when he predicts that it was the maid who was the killer, the black and white film was something that we shot ourselves. And
oh, really?
Yeah,
that's so convincing.
You had us fooled.
That's amazing.
We just thought it was some black and white movie we'd never hear of again.
Well, it was supposed to be, and we did not have it in our schedule. Me, and my partner and our DP all got together and we shot it ourselves. And my partner is the one who plays the maid, and I am the hand with the knife.
Oh, that's
Very
awesome.
nice.
that comes down on her. And yeah, we did it, the three of us, and degraded it and made it look older, and found a stock film that matched with it. So it starts with a real movie that we bought that was that was cheap enough for us to license, and then it cuts to the fake movie, which is I think just three shots, and they're pretty tight, and thankfully it worked. But that was my closest thing to a cameo. It was just my hand as I stabbed my partner to death.
So the last specifically kid detective related question we have is just about Jay McCarroll and his score for the movie, which I really liked, and it was really distinctive. And I was wondering what your working relationship with him was when he was scoring the movie.
It was just another amazing collaboration for me, and I had a lot of them. I mean, all of my heads of departments were just the best, and Jay, I've known forever. We were roommates years ago, and he's just been a good friend of mine for a long time. And when I finally got this film made, he was like wanting to chat about it, and because I've always known that Jay was like an extraordinary musical talent, and he can just play anything at the drop of a hat, and he has a great band, and he did a score for a short film actually that I made a few years before, and which was great. But going into this, I was like, I don't have experience on a movie at this level. So my first instinct was to surround myself with people who had lots of experience with a movie on that level. And I'm so glad that I ultimately totally flipped and went with people who were looking for, an equivalent kind of like step up. And look, like a lot of our heads of departments have done feature films before. But this was a step up for everybody, at least in terms of the budget. And with Jay, it was the first one that was like this, that he scored, that was so score reliant, where the score was going to be foregrounded in such a way and was so important in terms of defining the atmosphere, and also creating a sense of propulsion with respect to the story and the content of the scenes. And man, that was just it was just amazing. Like he's so brilliant, writes so quickly, and with respect to him, it was really very similar to my experience with my DP, where he was kind of trying to pull it out of me. I didn't have the musical language to be able to explain to him exactly what I wanted. And so he had to find a way to pull it out, the same way that my DP did when we were talking about the shots and the shot listing and the look of the film. And he was really, strategic. He was just very aggressive about that. And, we would talk about the flashback sequence, for example. And I didn't want it to seem, like, again, with the broader conversation with respect to this movie was I never wanted it to feel like a spoof. So I didn't want it to feel like a detective short movie where, made by like a 12-year-old or whatever, where it's like the real brassy, heavy, like saxophone, like, or I don't know, like just, she walked in and she had legs up to her chin and shit like that, where you like, sure. you know what I'm talking about, right? Where like it has a very detective-y, spoofy, slow, jazzy kind of sound. I was like, it can't be that, because that turns it into a skit, but it also can't be disconnected from the detective genre. Otherwise it's just
it can't
arbitrary.
Be that, and it can't not be that.
Exactly. So much like every other part of this process, it's what is the balance? Where is that line between those two worlds where it has enough of a relationship with that kind of detective aura, that detective, that classic detective atmosphere, but not so much that it feels like a spoof film or a parody. And that it's that it works in tandem with the visuals, which again are on their own, riding their own line. So much like with performance, with the the look of the film and everything, it was really just finding that like perfect balance with respect to the music. And goddamn, he did. It just took a few tries. Like he sent me some stuff and I was like, no, it's too detective-y. And then he sends me something else and I'm like, it's not detective-y enough. And so for him, he can either pull it all his hair and be like, holy shit, why did I ask to do this? or he can do what he did, which is like really, really hone in. And he composed so much more music for this movie than I think most composers do. I think most composers, they give you like 3 shots at something. Me and Jay, like, oh man, there's a mountain of stuff, wonderful stuff, beautiful stuff that he did. And as a result, like I felt like his work completes the illusion in terms of this movie, and really putting it on the shelf with those detective films that we always aspired to. It completes, like on a smaller budget, it makes it viable. It like really helped it all feel complete with respect to what he offered in terms of the score. And one other thing, oh yeah, with respect to the mountains of music, stuff like that, there was one theme that he did. It was the toughest theme in the whole film, and we didn't know that it would be. We really didn't think that it would be. And it was the second last scene of the movie. And for those who are listening who haven't watched, I'll resist too many details, but like, it's a really delicate moment between 2 characters. It can't, again, we found ourselves needing a different kind of balance where it can't feel too sad, but it also can't feel too bright and optimistic. It's a very tricky balance. And he wrote this incredibly beautiful melody with days to spare. We had to lock the film in days. We had to deliver the movie in days. We were up against the film festival deadline, had to be done. And so he completes this melody maybe 3 or 4 days out. We're watching the whole film for the first time with everything done. And I get to that scene and I'm like, shit, it's not right. It's too happy. There's too much warmth. And it was one of the most beautiful pieces he'd done, but there was too much warmth. And it was changing the emotion of the scene. It was changing the entire meaning of the scene. And it was one of the few scenes where that was a liability. And so I was like, Jesus, like, we got to redo it. And he went home that night and recomposed the whole thing. We put it into the movie the next day, and it was perfect. And it was just like, holy shit, like, thank God I listened to the gnawing voice in my head, because I wasn't totally sure. And he'd already worked so hard on it and was so proud of this piece that I was like, I don't know, is it just me? Am I just reading too much into it? Like, should I say something? Is it reasonable to ask him to go back to scratch on this?
It's hard to ask someone to do something for like the 7th time.
Well, yeah. And literally it was the 7th piece that he'd composed. And like, it was something like that. And if I hadn't listened to that voice, the ending of the movie would not have worked. It's as simple as that. And it's crazy how high the stakes are. And it's just incredible when you have people who are talented enough and care enough to be able to pivot like that and really dig in and make the best possible movie that they can make. And I just felt truly honored to be surrounded by those people with respect to this movie. And it is just so important. And another thing we did, which I'll share because, it's for film students, the advantage of having a team of people who all had something that they wanted to prove was immeasurable. Like everybody was just pushing it as hard as they could, giving you more than I think that you would get from someone who had already kind of like, who had already proven it again and again, And again, I feel again like this film would not have been possible if I'd followed my original instinct, right, which was to just surround myself with the people who had the most experience possible, who had already, who'd done it a million times already. We would not have done it on this budget.
You needed the starving artists.
Yeah, no, for real.
So our Big Kahuna last final question is, what was the last great film you watched?
Like, as in the one that was released most recently?
No, not necessarily. The one that you viewed and enjoyed most recently.
Gosh, oh man, I have such a bad memory. Okay, well, all right. I don't know. This is a movie that I really liked when I was young, and I hadn't watched it in a while. And after I finished The Kid Detective and started reading people comparing it to like a bunch of other noirs, it just got me interested in like revisiting a bunch that I hadn't looked at prior to making the film. And I looked at LA Confidential again for the first time in years, and was blown away by it. I just thought it was like such an extraordinary, such a incredibly atmospheric cinematic experience, and again, just such a satisfying noir mystery story where like impossible to imagine it with a different cast. And yeah, I was so pleased with how well it held up and how much I enjoyed it. And I feel like that's often not the experience when I put on movies that I really enjoyed when I was a kid. Often I feel like they, in some ways, just they don't work as well, or they feel a little cornier to me a lot of the time. And this one, I was just like, just so impressed with like it as a piece of film. Like I just thought that it was such a being transported to that particular place and time with that particular sensibility was just wonderful. Loved it.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up, Trent.
Yes, thank you so much to Evan Morgan, writer and director of The Kid Detective. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your time.
Oh, happy to chat, guys. Thanks for having me.
So, Parth, wasn't that interview pretty great? I thought so.
I had a pretty good time.
One of my favorites to date.
Yeah, I mean, I think getting to hear, how the whole movie got made, the whole process, 8 years was a long time. I really liked all his little stories he gave us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I guess next week you can hear us talk about the movie.
I'm excited to rewatch this film to talk about it with you. Because I really liked it the first time around because, I had to watch it before I interviewed the director. So annoying.
It annoyed Trent a lot, yeah.
I was like, Parth, you're forcing me to watch this movie just so I can have more informed questions? Ugh. And then he sent me to my room. I
did, and told him to eat so that we could record the intro for this episode.
Yeah, Parth, you, don't let me leave the dinner table until I eat all my vegetables.
I'm just cool like that. I just want you to fulfill the food pyramid, Trent. Bring it back around. You see what I did there?
Yeah. All right. Anyone who's come this far, thanks for your time.
We love you.
And give us a review on Apple Podcasts.
Rate us, follow us on our Instagram, follow us on our Twitter. Do the whole thing. Guys, come on. We're here for you.
Yeah, we do the show for our fans. Parth, I recently saw on our analytics that we have, a very small percentage of our listeners are from different countries. If you're listening to this and you're in a different country, let us know.
Please, we want to hear it.
Outside of the continental United States, please. Even if you're in Alaska or Hawaii.
All right. So join us next week for the discussion of this movie.
Yeah.
This is already a long episode. If you made it this far, it's like an hour 20, an hour 25.
Yeah, maybe find a hobby is what Parth is trying to say. But
well, find a hobby listening to this podcast.
But after the Kid Detective discussion, the next slate will be announced. Well, it's more complicated than that.
We've got some, I guess, I don't want to say what's coming next, but let's just say we have some interesting stuff coming up for a holiday that's showing up pretty soon.
Yeah, Parth, I was going to say, wouldn't you say it'd be fair to say that Craft Services has several special, sort of month-long things planned? Sort of... Yeah, would that be fair to say?
I'm not a judge. I would never presume to know what's fair. How about we just leave it at that? All right?
All right. Goodbye. That's it.
Bye, guys.
End of episode.
See you next time.
Yeah.